Good evening to all of you. All of you who watch TV already know Abhijit, and those who follow national affairs, international affairs know him. And he has also been on my Hindi YouTube many times. But this is his first time on my English YouTube channel, which I started recently. And all his other videos are also in English, in fact. So I will slowly download them from there and upload him here. And I'm looking forward to a very interesting discussion with him. And he is always a big proponent of free speech. So I do not know which way he would go. I have no idea what he would say, whether he would be pro the prime minister, anti the prime minister, what is his view on anything. But one thing I assure you, he knows exactly what he says, and is a master of the subject. So listen to it very carefully on what is happening between India, US in this COVID epidemic. The response of US has been very unusual. And that is why I invited him, and he has kindly come here. So thank you, Abhijit, for coming. And those of you watching for the first time, please subscribe and press the bell icon. Here is the link to subscribe. Thank you, Abhijit.
Well, thanks for having me on. So where do we start?
So we start with the basic thing that 10 days ago, we wanted raw materials. That's what set my brain thinking. And it took them 7-8 days to respond to it, which I felt was a very basic request, and on humanitarian grounds, with all the humane face of US, should have come in day one. So why did it take 7 days? What changed? What is happening? And the difference I would add to it, that I remember one of the talks I had with you, not in this COVID issue, where you said Biden coming in and his administration coming in would be a very different dealing with India. That has absolutely come true. So just start with this. Why did it take 7, 8, 10 days for the relief to come?
So before I answer that, I want to take the relationship chronologically since Biden becomes president-elect. Right. Now, what we know is that Biden is personally not compromised, but through his son is heavily compromised. And I think if you look at some of the photos of prostitution and drug abuse, they would have been enough to sink any other presidential candidate, but not Biden. Mostly because none of these were released, and the press and social media outlets, they actively suppressed all this photographic evidence and all the business sleaze that had happened. Now, what has happened is we should remember that Biden is in some stages of some kind of degenerative disease. And his deputy, the vice president, has zero government experience, having just been some low-level functionary in California and then suddenly catapulted to the national stage with absolutely zero experience in government. So what you have is a man who is incapable of any kind of prolonged attention, leave alone decision-making at the moment, and a second in command who is completely out of her depth. And so what you have is essentially a presidency that's being run by a mixture of, Democratic Party hacks, ideological hacks, without government experience, whose shadow on government is very, very long. Primarily because they're to be thanked for the victory. They were the ones who did all the organization and things. And they cast a very long shadow on this government. Most of the appointments that have been made are essentially corporate recommendations to forward corporate interests. Right. There are very few people who you could actually claim to be independent or have even remotely independent streak. They're all consummate insiders who have been at this nexus of corporate interests, military of the military industrial complex, and the the DNC's political interests. So we still don't know who's running the American government, but it's definitely not Kamala Harris, it's definitely not Joe Biden. Now, what happens in this case? Had it been Joe Biden, if he was in his senses, he might have understood the large-scale ramifications of the India-US relationship. But because the DNC's political managers are completely political animals. They're not foreign policy animals. They're not big picture animals or anything like that. I mean, they won't even know what happens outside America, except for their pretend internationalism. Their terms of reference for India are the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, or what have you. Now, because of this, what happens is they have decided that India somehow needs to be slowly downgraded. You just don't throw the passenger overboard. You create the conditions on the ship so that all the people in the ship vote to throw the troublesome passenger overboard in that sense. So the first manifestation of this you saw was the Quad, where they've essentially reduced it to a glorified climate change conference. Okay, it was never meant to be a climate change conference. It was always meant to be about China. The only thing they wanted to talk about was climate change. Okay, so that is number one, reduce the military salience of India. The second thing that they've done is announcing the freedom of navigation operations that their Navy ship conducted through Indian territorial waters. Now, American ships have conducted these operations every year for the last 10 years, except maybe 1 or 2 years in between. 2018, I think, was one, and 2020 was one, yeah. Now, what's happened is, for the first time, they've decided to announce this publicly on Twitter. Why? Very simple. Yeah.
Firstly, I'll just 2 points I wanted to add because this is relevant to it. What Abhijit is referring to is the US Navy going through exclusive economic zone of India, the waters in the ocean, right? So you are saying that was a habitual thing, but it was not publicly announced. That is a change, that they have publicly announced that they have come into the area which India calls as its exclusive economic zone. So, and secondly, on Senator Harris, I want you to answer both of these, and I will come to Washington Post later because I have something to speak on that. Why do you call her low-level functionary? She was a senator.
One second, let me finish, and then we'll get to the questions, right?
Okay.
So then what's happened is, every year these have happened. America understands that the reason we did our exclusive economic zone was to send a warning shot to the Chinese. Even though they violated our EEZ in the Arabian Sea, they know why it was done, so that we can use the Andaman. The more China keeps expanding its territorial claims, we can claim the same with regards to the Malacca Straits and do something out there, right? Everybody understood this. So, the last 10 times when American ships sailed through, there was no Indian ship challenging them. We were like, cool. So even if a Chinese ship went through, we were like, cool, dude. I mean, it's not a big deal. It's more of a reserve to be used against China at a later date, rather than any expression of exclusive economic usage. Now, what the Americans have done is they always reported these, but they put it in their annual report. It will be hidden somewhere in their annual report behind pages and pages of information. It will simply say, America carried out freedom of navigation operations in this area. This time, they decide to put it out in Twitter in a particularly aggressive way, saying in response to India's excessive claims, and mind you, they did it to other allies as well. They did it to South Korea as well, claiming what? Excessive maritime claims. Now, understand what they've done. They've put India and South Korea on the same level as China. They've basically said, ally or not ally does not matter. We view you all the same. Right. So that in itself is, they themselves have debunked this common, what do you call it, the shared values argument, because clearly there's not shared values out here. The third thing regards to COVID relief, because what happened with COVID relief was we asked for it first, and Jen Psaki said, the White House press correspondent, she said, yes, we will consider it, and that's it. 2 days later, the male, her deputy, comes about and he says, no, we're not. We've got to be worried about Americans first. And the world, I quote, the world should be grateful because an American vaccinated is the whole world vaccinated, or words to that effect.
Okay.
Now, suddenly after 5 days, 5 or 6 or 7 days, whatever, Biden, Kamala, they all put out statements. The NSA puts out a statement. The Secretary of State puts out a statement. Oh, we're going to help India. They were essentially alarmed at the way their inaction and their arrogance was being perceived in India. They were shamed into doing it. They didn't do it of their own volition, and they realized that this was one of those things that wasn't going to go down well, even with their own democratic voter base. The Indian Americans that who tend to vote overwhelmingly Democrat. But understand this. Now, what has happened is just a temporary blip. After this, they're going to get back to the position of equating India with China. They're going to get back to claiming India as a fascist dictatorship. Therefore, we don't share common values anymore. They're going to get back to saying that, sort of equating, reducing the status of all American allies in the region vis-a-vis China, saying, you're kind of all in the same boat. And this process of sort of delegitimizing and ultimately deplatforming India is going to take about 5 to 7 years, but it's going to happen. Make no mistake, it's going to happen. If the Democrats come back in another 4 years' time, it's going to happen again. And the problem is they are so deep in the system that the damage they cause will be permanent. It might almost end up being like the US-Russia relationship, in which case, even if you get a Republican administration, there's very little the Republicans can do to repair that relationship.
Okay, Abhijit. Now, because you have 2 questions which a lot of people are asking, but I will first deal with my questions. One is, why do you think Kamala Harris is not knowing what she is doing? She was the Attorney General of California, big state, then a senator, and at one time was the party favorite to win the primary. She could not win it. The public didn't vote for it. But she was the overwhelming favorite of the machinery, and that is why she became the vice president also. So you think she is the choice of the machinery, controlling the machinery, or she was what the machinery thought an acceptable face, whom they have put into the vice president's office, and the machinery is controlling her?
She's very much controlled by the machinery. She is the face of the machinery. She is the desire of the machinery. She may be sort of the most acceptable face of the machinery. But remember, she passed the bar that the machinery set, saying all of these are acceptable. Like, in India, the way we run a fighter equipment program is everybody has to pass the technical parameters, or uske baad you have the L1, L2. So she passed the basic wokeness parameter, and then she became L1. She won the L1 contest for least offensive, least number of negative votes she's going to get.
But Abhijit, so we are talking about deep state. You think the US deep state has become permanently woke in the last 8-10 years? You think there is this fundamental change in the deep state, which is now, because on surface it appears in US interest to raise up India to counterbalance China, which is their real threat. So, but have they become
a real threat anymore? There are 2 issues with this. One is they don't see it as they see China as a manageable threat. They do not see Russia as a manageable threat. So for them, technically, Russia is priority number 1, China is only priority number 2. And remember, their whole sense of history, their self-view, their validation is very Eurocentric. So European priorities are their priorities, not Asian priorities. They don't see themselves through the Japanese lens, through the South Korean lens, through the Singaporean lens. They see themselves through the German, the Polish, the Ukrainian lens, because, fellow Europeans and all of that. So there's that. The second thing is that, these, practically speaking, they keep creating areas of tension with Russia, almost to see to it that the China threat always remains in the background. It never becomes the primary threat, even though it is the primary strategic threat. in much the same way that China uses Pakistan. China is the bigger threat for India, but Pakistan is always, most of our defense planning is unfortunately based around Pakistan. Why? Because Pakistan is the immediate threat. Here, it's not China manipulating Russia to do something. It's the American establishment itself manipulating the threat so that Russia will be number one. Why? Because too many of them are linked up to business interests in China. They're essentially, I think, it's gotten past the point of no return. It's past the critical mass where so many of your elites are invested in China. They simply can't afford for China to become enemy number one. Therefore, even though they can't come up with any logical statement to say China is not enemy number one, in practice, they will always make Russia enemy number one. So this is one aspect of it. But to answer the second part of your question, yes, they are woke. And you know why? They may personally not be woke. This is like, we can all agree Jinnah was personally a very secular man. He ate pork ham sandwiches. His wife Rati used to go around wearing, very revealing dresses, low hemline dresses and things like that. He used to drink beer very regularly to the extent that, it used to really irritate Nehru and Gandhi. Even Nehru used to get irritated by his ability to munch on pork ham sandwiches and beer in semi-closed surroundings. So if he was that liberal that he could get on Nehru's nerves, that shows you a lot. But his politics was completely communal out and out, right? So the democratic leadership are personally not woke, but wokeism is an extremely powerful tool for mass control. Because remember, in any society, only between 3 to 7% of the population are genetically predisposed towards being white collar, to earn a lot and things like that. So how do you go? Now, this is the exact opposite of what Hillary Clinton did. Hillary Clinton called everybody voting for Trump a basket of deplorables. Now, as the former Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper said at Raisina in the Raisina dialogue, he said, you can't call people stupid to their face and expect them to vote for you. So what the Democrats learned from that. So what they did instead was they basically going around telling the remaining, out of the remaining 97% of the population, I would say about 50% accept who they are, 50% more, about 60 to 70%, it keeps growing now, do not accept that they are responsible for their own actions. So imagine, it's such a powerful message saying that, you are a child molester or you are a murderer, not because of some inherent bad in you, it's because of the privilege and systemic oppression that you have been turned into this by society. You are not responsible. It's the collective guilt of society. बच्चे तुमने मैथ्स में जीरो नहीं पाया है, सोसाइटी ने पाया है, तुम दोषी नहीं हो. You tell me, if you go to a kid in school and say, beta, you are not responsible for the 0 and 100 you got. It's actually, that Brahminical teacher of yours shoving Brahminical patriarchy down your throat. They're discriminating. You've been given a 0 because you're a girl. Or you've been given a 0 because, you look a certain way or talk a certain way. It's a very powerful way of absolving you of your own responsibility. It is responsibility that makes us adults. It is an acceptance of responsibility that makes us adults. So essentially what wokeism does is it prolongs puberty. Your puberty should end by the time you're about, 16, 17? Here they extend it to 50, 60, 70 years of age. Right? So it's a fantastic tool for mass control. It's a fantastic tool for, absolving yourself of responsibility for fixing things. Why couldn't you fix the economy? It wasn't me. It was systemic privilege and racism, which I couldn't work against. Okay, it actually goes even a step further in this sense if you look at it, because essentially what it's doing is it's a very powerful communisto medieval style
I was
form
about to come to
of
that.
social control. Because, what used to happen in the medieval ages was you never knew when you would be accused of witchcraft and for what you would be accused of witchcraft and then burnt alive at the stake. Right? Today, what you have is essentially a lynch mob. You don't have the same blood libel against the Jews, but it's a variation of blood libel against Jews that is now open for everyone. Anyone and everyone can be accused of whatever for thought crimes, speech crimes, whatever, and be effectively burnt at the stake or verbally burnt at the stake. I mean, the verbal equivalent. The second thing, which is more insidious in all of this, is the parallels to communist China, because we understand from communist China what this kind of mass hysteria leads to, because we've seen it. You can say that this was in an old setting. In communist China, we've seen this in a modern industrial setting. And it's very, very scary because that is where you combine it with mass murder as well. Right? So that is where this whole thing is going. Ultimately, it comes back to what Will Durant says. It's a country is not destroyed from outside. A great democracy always chooses to destroy itself from within.
Abhijit,
So America is doing to itself what Hugo Chavez did to Venezuela.
Abhijit, when you were saying and talking about witch hunting, I was going back to it's a very powerful doctrine where you blame others for your trouble, be it woke or be it Russia or Soviet Union type communism, where you blame the ruling classes, the elite for all your troubles, did communism, and then you went bankrupt and you are back to a dictator, effectively a dictator ruling your country and China. So the ability to blame others for your problems would always give you huge political benefit. And woke, you are saying China leads to mass executions. I would say, aren't wokes destroying mass careers? At this one off joke, one off line said when you were a teenager, when you were 20, people joke. It could be stupid, it could be atrocious, it could be insensitive. And 30 years down the line, your career could be over. And when you joked, it wasn't even probably very insensitive. It was just a par for course. Our languages have changed in 20 years. And your career could be over.
And notice how you can play this. The clearest example of how to play this is the way Justin Trudeau pulled it off. He was caught doing blackface not on one occasion, but on three separate occasions. Mm-hmm. And in his so-called apology, notice he never apologized for himself. He blamed it on society. Societal racism is so bad, I did not realize the gravity of this. No blame on himself. And they forgive him.
Because he's Justin. See, he can get away with it.
Exactly. So what you're seeing now is, it's a two-way system. One is, this is a fantastic way for corporate bosses to protect themselves from incompetence. Because they'll say the moment the board tries to remove this guy for incompetence or falling revenue or whatever, he'll say it's because of all the social justice measures I was taking. These guys are essentially a perpetuation of white supremacy and so on and so forth. Second, what it does is it prevents anybody from within the institution from challenging you, because it keeps bogging you down in such a toxic environment. You just keep your head down and do your work because you're so shit scared. You don't know what's going to be used against you. So it's essentially a climate of fear, of corporate fear that you introduce. Excuse me. And then there's the other side of it, who are the validators of wokeness. They will give you sufficiently woke or insufficiently woke certificates or curses based on how much you donate to their pet cause, which is essentially skimmed off to buy mansions in Beverly Hills and things like that. So it's both an extortion mechanism, the same way, say, the church used to use certain things to extract certain goodies for itself. And it's a form of extraordinary, extreme, intrusive, highly societally debilitating social control. That society is permanently toxic and permanently at war with itself, but the ruling classes are perfectly safe, because if people are fighting each other, they can't change what's on top.
Abhijit, woke in liberals are a discussion I'll call you again, because that's a separate topic and a very big topic. I would bring a question back to the US-India relationships and what they're attempting to do. So my question is, somebody also asked, would Trump have been different? That's a hypothetical. But what you are saying, even if a new Republican comes, let's say Trump wins in 24 or some form of Trump wins in 24, you think this damage that they are going to put in the roots of relationship will be permanent? So a new Trump won't really make a difference. A new Republican will not make a difference.
No, he or she may be able to arrest the decline, but I think if they've done so much damage in a matter of just 3 months, he was sworn in on what, January 20th?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so February 20th,
April,
March,
yeah.
April. So it's just
days.
been in 3 months. They've managed to create so much damage. Imagine what 4 years is going to be like. They haven't even gotten started, boss. It's the beginning of a soft regime change operation.
Okay. So the second question comes from what you said just now, that by being woke and corporate, they can control funds. I read, and I want you to confirm that or deny that, is that the aid which they have promised to India by corporate America is not going to the PM or is not going to be controlled by the center, but they say it will go to states, and it will go to, when it goes to state, it will go to their allies, and it will go to NGOs, Amnesty International, and so many more, which you would know. And so is that true, that the aid that is coming will not come under the control of central government, but would be dispersed to all these NGOs who have been fund starved,
Yes.
have been resolutions cancelled, FCRA, etc., legal violations, etc.?
It can't be sent to people whose FCRA has been cancelled.
No, I mean those groups.
But a whole set of local governments, and it will be directly administered where it's required, because they don't want the central government to take credit. They want it to be outside the purvey of the central government. They want to give it to people who they know will be long-term allies. It will almost certainly be disproportionately given to anti-Modi people, because on one hand, they're trying to delegitimize Modi and the process of Indian elections, and on the other, they're trying to re-legitimize their own, fellow travelers. I won't say allies, but fellow travelers. So I don't know why Modi thanked them. Modi shouldn't have even spoken to Biden. But, it's really a caliber of the advice he gets. I mean, he's got a unique, his only undeniable unique talent other than winning elections is choosing prize idiots. Jaishankar and Amitabh Kant being classic examples. Overrated. There's more proof of India's nuclear weapons than there has ever been any public proof of Jaishankar's intelligence. And there's actually more proof of the existence of black holes than there has ever been of Amitabh Kant's the black hole in his head.
Why do you use such strong language? He was the foreign secretary, the top diplomat of India, Jaishankar. So why are you using such strong language that his advice is not?
Well, look, he was taken for a ride. He was taken for a ride by the Maldivians. He was taken for a ride by the Nepalese. There isn't a single person he hasn't been. The problem in India is we tend to confuse social grace and speaking English with intelligence. He's very refined. Look at his pedigree. He's IFS. He knows how to hold his wine properly. He talks to all the right people. He says all the right things. He's actually presided over a precipitous decline in the number of... We were talking about expanding the foreign service. He's literally sat and presided over a reduction in the total number of diplomats. From 700 plus, we've now come down to 700 minus. Right? So, remember, people can be... He may even be individually brilliant, but clearly he's not up to the job institutionally. Amitabh Kant is a marketer, okay, but he is not an executor. He's definitely not anything beyond advertisement. And if you want to look at the clearest example of that, look at his brainchild, Incredible India. It was great at advertising and everything, but what happened in its... See, when you advertise, there should be a product improvement that happens. There should be security for people coming in. They shouldn't get conned. You need to ensure good prices for them, different packages, proper transport infrastructure, tourism infrastructure, all of that. वो तो कुछ नहीं हुआ था ना. He spent the entire budget on advertising, and that tells you a lot about this government. It's all advertising, 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 zero substance. It's like, the polo ads, the mint with the hole. They're effectively selling you the hole, but they claim they're selling you the mint.
Fair enough. But Abhijit, now I would come to the last part of this, which is very important. When you say that, and you started it in the beginning, and I have some of these articles I want people to see, because you started by saying their audience is Washington Post, their audience is New York Times. These are some of the biggest papers of US. And just for a second, just see the headline in Washington Post. Is it visible on a screen? Opinion.
Not yet.
Okay, let me just see if it is. Has it come? Yeah, I think so. Should be there. Is it there? Opinion. President Biden stand up for internet freedoms in India. By the editorial.
This is the same Washington Post that was celebrating Trump being cartel kicked off the internet.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. They are now, because, that's a separate topic again. I don't want to go into that of internet freedoms in India and banning these accounts and whether these bans were counterproductive rather than being productive and made it more viral, more famous, whatever. That's a very separate debate. But US effectively telling Twitter and Facebook, Washington Post telling president to take a stand and prevent Indian government from issuing or telling Twitter or Facebook to ban anything. That's the campaign, and that's by editorial board. It's not opinion by a writer. That's the editorial view.
Yeah.
So, and that would have its. You think that would have its necessary impact because these people are guided by Washington Post and New York's and Australian and the Times, etc.
See, that's not what worries me. What worries me the extent to which the Indian government itself is compromised. Because remember, the last time when something like this happened. Over the slave owner riots. We shouldn't call them farmers. They're not farmers. They're the middlemen and the slave owners who still practice bonded labor and who are basically skimming off subsidies. It's the parasites and slave owners protest.
Very different views from you, sir, but I will not get into this.
But I'm going to call it
I want to say my views are very different from his on this. But yeah, let's.
That's fine. So the slave owners and the parasites protest. You remember what happened? They sent a circular to Twitter. Twitter refused to take them down. And all the government could do was come up with guidelines. And the court had to say, are you kidding me? Go back and draft these as laws. It shows you the complete spinelessness of the Indian government, or worse, the extent to which it has been financially compromised.
But Abhijit, without, as I said, I'm not getting into the farmers issue. That's a separate debate and not germane to this one. But the point is this, that do you think Indian government has the capacity with its domination on social media, at least Twitter? I don't think so it dominates on Facebook and Instagram, but on Twitter it dominates, to nuke its own strongest platform?
It actually doesn't dominate. I don't know why you think it dominates. What it does is it has a lot of people that bring down the people who dominate. It doesn't set the narrative on Twitter. It just uses it to harangue and bring down people who do set the narrative on Twitter. So, we have a very different perception of what BJP's dominance is. The only BJP dominance is with a non-English speaking voter, where it is able to convey directly messages. But it is not dominant on Twitter. It is not dominant on Facebook. It is not dominant online. I would disagree with that completely.
It is not.
It is also much more prone to purges. It is also completely on the back foot in terms of both narrative setting and in terms of normative values on Twitter and on any other social platform, in fact. So no, I disagree there. And it's too scared to do anything. It's that fundamental inferiority complex driven need to constantly appease the white man. I have never come across a government that is so in awe of English-speaking white people than this government is. I have seen dogs that are less deserving, that care less about a good boy and the bone in the mouth than this cabinet is.
So you think that, anyways, again, as I said, we have with Abhijit, it's a free-flowing discussion. We will go from farmers' protest to social media, which would again be a very separate debate or woke. Let us one day do this woke and social media debate, because on Twitter, I do think they dominate. On Instagram, I think they're not even in the race. On Facebook, they try. They're an honest trier. That is my view of how these three mediums are operating. But is it also because, let's say, YouTube? I have seen an exponential increase in leftist YouTube channels. And I was discussing with somebody, and he had a very interesting point to make. He said the leftist YouTube channels would grow for a simple reason that media is, for better or worse, under some amount of BJP control, and the big budgets are with right-wing channels. And that is why people who want to seek leftist views are forced to go to YouTube. NDTV is not dominating the airwaves. Unlike US, where you had a Fox which was dominating the airwaves, which is the #1 channel, whereas the CNN and MSNBC and all that stuff is not there. But anyways, that's a larger debate on YouTube issues. Coming to the question I had on Washington Post and all, do you think these things would then start creeping into the Facebook, Twitter behavior? Even more so, if you say they're already there?
They always do. Because see, it's, for a long time, I used to believe this thing that, the English press is irrelevant. Because, only there'll totally be about 1 to 2 million English newspaper readers in this country. And there'll be, hundreds, if not tens of millions of Hindi readers and things like that. Yeah, regional language readers. Now, there's a problem with that. See, the English newspapers may not have the reach, but because of the prestige associated with the language and the people running those papers, they set the narrative. So if you notice, a narrative always begins with the financial press. It then trickles down to the mainstream English press, and then it trickles down to the regional press. Okay. That is where you're going to see the knockdown effect. We're already seeing the knockdown effect. 7 years of constantly ignoring your image management abroad. Why? Because you think the siege mentality gets you more votes. It's good for your vote bank. We're seeing the result of that.
Abhijit, that's not fair. He didn't ignore Trump. He tried to build very strong relationships with
Trump isn't the Western press. Trump is not the Washington Post.
And he was opposed by them, yeah.
See, what you need is you have a dunce of a foreign minister who was shut up saying absolutely nothing, behaving like a Talayattu Bomme. That's those Tamil dolls where the neck is kind of detached and they just go like that every time the wind goes. So this dunce of a foreign minister doesn't open his mouth throughout the riots. There is no briefings done for foreign diplomats, nothing. And 4 months down the line, when the US Council on Religious Freedoms, because they have not had a public rebuttal or any government rebuttal on record, factual rebuttal on record, decides to publish a negative report about India and send their inspectors to inspect India, he suddenly goes into this thing, who the hell do you think you are? And every bloody idiot of a right-winger in India starts orgasming to the fact that, oh my God, haan, isne dam dikhaya. काम कुछ नहीं किया, बैठ के पता नहीं जुआ खेल रहा था या रात को दारू पी रहा था, पता नहीं क्या कर रहा था, पर फिर आके एक लाइन बोल दिया ना, गब्बर सिंह की तरह या धर्मेंद्र की तरह, साले कुत्ते मैं तेरा खून पी जाऊंगा, वाह 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 वाह. वो, that Salman Khan can't act.
That I agree.
all wait for that moment when he opens his shirt, when they all go, "Arey bhaiya ne shirt, bhai ne shirt utar diya." This is what you're seeing. This is the Salman Khanization of foreign policy. This is the Salman Khanization of investment policy. The Salman Khanization of FDI attraction. This is what you get.
Abhijit, but in this, I would like to add a question and a little bit of a point. Yeah, it is true. Sometimes we believe our own propaganda way more, like some propaganda I saw.
Sometimes nahi.
Like one piece I would let me add to it, without using your flowery and strong language, being restrained in my languages. I saw on social media trending that our NSA managed to threaten the US NSA, and that is why all this happened. I said, let's start getting realistic. There is no way you can threaten the US NSA to do anything for you. It's their own compulsion that they're doing it. Let us not be myopic and believe all these things because they aren't true. You can't threaten the US NSA. It's just not happening. That's like saying an MLA threatened the... Anyways, I'm not getting into that. So that sort of a thing is going to be a problem. But now, do you think what are the options in India and what are the way ahead if you see that? And it's a very important point you made, and I want to ask that only, that 90 days have made it so difficult. So we have 4 years to go. So what do you think? Do you think what is the room or direction India should maneuver in? What are the options? Because China is not our friend. US it's invading our territory, not invading our territory, another topic. And that video of Abhijit I will upload on this, so you can see it on this channel. I'll upload it. What do you think is our options vis-a-vis US?
We have very limited options. Remember, thanks to our own economic incompetence, that for the last 30 years, we weren't able to follow up on what P.V. Narasimha Rao achieved. Nobody's been able to achieve what that man achieved, you know. Though Vajpayee did try some, I mean, he did achieve some things, just not to the scale at which Narasimha Rao did. You're paying the price for your own stasis. You're paying the price for being an ostrich and having this sab chalta hai, sab theek ho jayega attitude. Mummy, Titanic डूब रहा है, कुछ नहीं बच्चे, सब ठीक हो जाएगा. This is, you know, that Somnath attitude. When Ghazni is outside coming, laying siege to the temple, you know, nobody wants to take stones and throw it at the invaders. They're doing puja part, waiting for the miracle to happen. And you know what happens with Ghazni and the Somnath temple. This is that same mentality. इधर पूजा भजन पाठ करते रहो, Ghazni आते रहेंगे. That's we're cursed.
So you think we are in that difficult a spot in the next 4 years on? And one question more I would like to add. Do you think I have seen a lot of this, that Rahul Gandhi's interaction in foreign universities, this and that. Do you think that is also subtly playing a role in the sense that if they want a regime change, these people are...
I can honestly tell you that nobody, even the wokest of Washington Post and New York Times correspondents, takes Rahul Gandhi seriously. They may hate Modi, but nobody is willing to take Rahul Gandhi seriously. They do not see Rahul Gandhi as the hope. The problem is they'll end up stuck with Rahul Gandhi. That's a different matter. Right? It will be worse for them than anything humanly possible. But look, it is what it is. But no, they don't take Rahul Gandhi, and Rahul Gandhi is having zero impact. It's actually the newspapers and people like, say, Rana Ayub, who have a lot more, I would say, Rana Ayub has more credibility than Rahul Gandhi. That should tell you something about Rahul Gandhi.
Okay, so
it should also tell you about the people conferring credibility on Rana Ayub.
On both of them, yeah. That answers both of them. So thank you so much, Abhijit, for doing this. And I would request you to come back, and there I would have a free-flowing discussion with you. This was more of hearing you on woke and liberalism and social media. And there I will try to use language never as flowery as you, but at least somewhere in the same garden. So thank you so much, Abhijit, for doing this.
Well, Vetrivel, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.